Hello, Harbor Church. My name is Joel Thomas. Let me be the first to say, welcome home. So glad you are with us today. I don't know if you're like me, but I have kind of a regimen that I go through every morning. And this is true Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? It happens every morning. First thing I do is I get up in the morning and I grab my phone. Now, it's not for the reasons you're thinking. I've made a commitment over the last year, really 2 years, that before my feet swing off the edge of the bed, before they hit the ground, before I really start my day, I'm going to begin in God's Word. And so what I do is I've got the YouVersion Bible app, I've got it on my phone, and I've got it set up for the verse of the day. And so in the morning, I get up, I grab my phone, and I go straight to the YouVersion Bible app, and I read the verse of the day. I spend a couple minutes, right? I pray the verse, I meditate on it, I just pray through it, I pray for God to just be with me in today. And so this last Monday was like any other day. I had gone through that, I'd spent my time in the Word there in the YouVersion Bible app, I'd read the verse, I'd reflected on it, and then I get up, and as I'm walking over to the bathroom, I'm checking email, and all of a sudden, right, the day starts to happen, and I feel anxiety building, and you start thinking about all the to-dos and all the stuff that each of us have to deal with. I get into the bathroom, I get to the bathroom counter, I set my phone down, and then for some reason, I don't always do this, I switched over to Facebook. And Facebook does this kind of strange thing, it gives you like suggestions of videos. And I just needed to kind of break from looking at emails and checking other things. So I sat and I clicked that, and it pops up, right? It's this video of the 2015 CrossFit Games. It's the final of the Murph Challenge. Now, for those of you who maybe are not familiar with CrossFit or maybe not familiar with what the Murph Challenge is, the Murph Challenge is actually done in honor of a fallen soldier whose last name was Murphy. And so they do this challenge called the Murph Challenge, and it is this. Listen to this. So you've got 1 mile run. You're wearing also a weight vest. I'm not entirely sure how much weight is in there, but it looks heavy. So you take off. Again, these are the fittest athletes on the planet. They take off and they run 1 mile. As soon as they come into the stadium from running 1 mile, they go straight to a chin-up bar, and they do 100 chin-ups. Right? You just go straight from that 100 chin-ups, you still have the weight vest on. After you get done with the 100 chin-ups, you move over and you do 200 push-ups, right? 200 push-ups. And from that, you walk forward, and they've got this kind of across this playing field. And the next thing is you do 300 squats. So 1 mile, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, and 300 squats. Once that's done, again, wearing a weight vest, you then take off for another mile, and that's the Murph Challenge. And so you've got just some of the fittest guys on the planet are doing this. And I'm watching this, and I couldn't look away. It's not a typical thing I do, certainly not a typical Monday, but I could not look away from it. I was fascinated by it. I'm watching these guys. I mean, when I watch this, this is the vomit challenge, is what it looks like to me, right? And so you're watching these guys, and what I'm noticing is every guy, whether they're doing the run, or they're doing pull-ups, or they're doing push-ups, or squats, whatever it is, they keep looking at their watches. And I'm sitting there, and I'm a former runner. I kind of run, right, a little bit. I did cross country in high school. I did triathlons in college, and I've been that kind of competitor. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, dude, stop watching your time. Just go. Don't worry about the time, right? Guys are starting to pass other guys, and I'm just watching this. And then it occurs to me, they're not watching their watches for their time. They're looking at their watches to check their heart rates, because they know that there's no way they're going to make it through this Murph Challenge. There's no way they're going to do it if they exceed, right, their aerobic threshold, if they climb up much higher than their target heart rate, if they get beyond their lactic acid threshold, they're going to collapse. Right? You're going to flame out, pass out, tap out. The whole thing's going to happen. And these guys have trained themselves to pace themselves. And so you see the guys, right? They're doing it, and they're looking, they'll do 10 pull-ups, they'll do 15 push-ups, right? Whatever it is. And then they stop and they look, and they're checking their heart rate, because they know that if they're going to make it through all the challenges, they have to pace themselves. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head as I'm watching that. Man, I think that's a season that we find ourselves in now. This is a crazy event. I don't know about you, but I didn't know that I was doing a modified Murph challenge when I walked into the month of March, right? We walked in and it's like, man, I thought I was just out for a leisurely jog. And then you're throwing, right? Then I got to do pull-ups and then push-ups and squats and another run. It's like, well, I came in and I heard about, right, COVID and okay, we seem to have walked through that. Oh, and then we're going to throw in somewhere in there is murder hornets. And I'm not sure what happened there, but we evidently got through that event. And then we moved on to racial pain and injustices, and we're just beginning to kind of wade through that. And then, oh, by the way, COVID is coming back, and everything's getting more intense, and it just feels like we entered into a race that I had no idea had so many events in it. And I can feel the lack of healthy pace in my own life. I met with a handful of pastors this last week, all of them who just feel exhausted. And I don't know, I don't think it's just for pastors. I think it's so many of us in all walks of life. There's a tired that you and I feel sometimes where it's like, you know what, I need to go to bed earlier. I need to sleep in a little bit. I just need to focus on those natural rhythms, which are right and healthy. And then there's a season where we have all been running at it, just one thing after the next, right? Pull-ups, push-ups, squats, running. It just feels like another event every day, every week, every month, and we're not pacing ourselves well. And the truth is, if we don't do that, just like a CrossFit athlete, man, we're just going to collapse. And that's kind of one of the points today. If we don't learn to pace ourselves, we will flame out, we will pass out, and we will ultimately tap out when it comes to the race of life. And here, I want to unpack that a little bit more. When I talk about flame out, again, I think there are three categories. When we don't develop a healthy pace, there's these three big buckets that I think all of us fall into at different times. And there's different warning signs for each this one, right? If we don't have a good pace, we're going to flame out. And flame out, I think for most of us, looks like leaning into addictions. It means leaning into those unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? On a normal, regular, average world, we can kind of see those unhealthy things from a mile away. We can avoid them. We've set up, right, coping mechanisms to even protect us from the unhealthy ones. But when you are running over and over and over again, when things keep changing at a ridiculous pace, when there's stuff you can't anticipate, and when you haven't developed the discipline of a healthy pace and rest, man, you're in danger of flaming out. You're in danger of falling into those addictions, right? We just find ourselves, I just want to self-medicate. I just want to feel good, even temporarily, because I've watched too much pain on the news. I've watched too much pain in my own life. I'm struggling financially, whatever it is, you begin to tip over because, again, we haven't developed a healthy pace. We're exhausted. And so we run the risk of flaming out, falling into those addictions, those moral failures. And at the end of the day, flaming out means losing our integrity. If we don't figure out a healthy way to maintain our pace through this multi-event race that we're all running, and we're in danger of flaming out, of losing our integrity. You know, Proverbs 10:9 says this about integrity. It says, whoever walks with integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. On a normal circumstances, right, under good circumstances, healthy circumstances, we can avoid some of those moral pitfalls, some of those moral failures, some of those unhealthy, addictive, man, just flat out bad coping mechanism, pornography, alcohol, pot, all of those things, maybe over binging on Netflix, overeating, all of those things are ways that we flame out, and we end up losing our integrity because we get sucked into them because we've not learned to pace ourselves. Because we're not walking with integrity. No, instead, we're taking those crooked paths. And trust me when I tell you this, God cares too much for you. He cares too much about the people in your sphere of influence, your family, all of that, to allow you not to ultimately be found out. And as Proverbs says, whoever takes crooked paths, you will be found out. When you lean towards flaming out, when you don't have a good, healthy pace in life, you will be found out and you will no longer be walking in integrity. You will lose that integrity. Right, so there's three buckets. If we don't develop a healthy pace, first, we're going to flame out. Second is this, I believe we'll pass out. What does passing out look like? What do I mean by that? First of all, it's living daily in the overwhelming feeling of exhaustion. It's not having some of those just standard, healthy physical rhythms. Right? It leads to burnout. It means hitting the wall. It means really your emotions are manic. Your highs are ridiculously high and your lows are ridiculously low. What that ends up looking like, flaming out ends up losing your integrity. When you begin to lean towards the pass out, that means losing your ambition. And man, when we lose ambition, boy, the edges start to fray really fast in our lives. Jesus said this in Matthew 6:33. He said, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." There's an order to this. This needs to be our primary ambition in life. His kingdom, his righteousness. But you know what? When you're in danger, right? When you don't have a healthy pace, when you've not been checking, right, your heart rate and calming things down and pushing back the anxiety and the overwhelm and the worry and all that through natural healthy paces of rest and rhythms in your life, you're in danger of flaming out, losing your integrity, and you're in danger of passing out and losing your ambition. Your ambition to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. I think this is true for us when we begin to lose our ambition, when we lean into that passing out, when our ambition fails. We lose our grip on the promises and the purposes of God. When our ambition fails, we lose our grip on the promises and the purposes of God. Check yourself right in this moment. Ask yourself, oh man, so that's what he means by passing out. Are you in danger of losing that? Oh, that's what he means by flaming out. Are you in danger of losing some integrity? Are you in danger of losing your ambition for the things of God because you have not developed and sustained and disciplined yourself with a healthy pace of life? So, right, we're in danger of flaming out, of passing out, and then finally, we're ultimately in danger of tapping out. And here's what I mean by that, right? It's just going numb. It's all of us in those days, those weeks where like, I can't look at another news article. And there's a healthiness to that. Don't hear me wrong. I think there's a healthy scenario of pushing back and limiting some of that, all of those kind of things. But when you find yourself, I just can't care anymore. You're just flattened out because you're beginning to give up. You've stopped trying and you're checking out. And the problem is we're not compartmentalized beings. We like to think we are. We like to think how I am at work and how I am at home and how I am in this relationship and that relationship, that they don't bleed into each other. We'd like to tell ourselves that, but it's a lie. The truth is when I begin, right, ultimately to tap out in one area, it starts to bleed into the others. When I'm numb here, I begin to get numb everywhere, right? I flatten out. If flaming out means I begin to lose my integrity and passing out means I lose my ambition, then tapping out means that we begin to lose hope. Oh man. And when you start stacking those on top of each other, everything falls apart. Again, all because we maybe haven't learned the discipline of rest and pacing ourselves. Proverbs 13:12 said this about hope. It says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Makes the heart sick, right? The heart, that was the site of our core being. For us in Western culture, it's our mind, right? The mind is kind of the center of who we are. For the Israelites, for Hebrew culture, the center of your being was your heart. And in this Proverb 13:12, right, it says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. That means to the very core of myself. When I begin to lose hope, when I begin to ultimately tap out mine, who I am at my core is sick. But it says, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life, is a tree of life. And so I think for all of us, you go, okay, that's great, Joel. If I don't have those healthy rhythms, right, I'm gonna flame out, I'm gonna pass out, I'm ultimately gonna tap out. So then what is the solution? As I thought about that this last Monday, as I prayed about it, as I just spent time, asking God, what's the solution here? He led me to one verse in particular, and it's a verse that I think not only is it maybe the beginning of the solution for us, I think the entire solution may be contained in this one verse about pacing and about rest. And it's Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. And it's Jesus' words. Man, hear this. and let it just wash over you. He says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your soul. Oh man, let me say that again. Man, just close your eyes. Get quiet wherever you're at. Wherever you are listening to this, right? Hear the words of Jesus to you, to me, as he speaks into the crazy pace of your life and my life. He says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your souls. You know what's interesting about that verse? There's so much. I'm gonna try to pull back some layers here. Here's what he doesn't say. Jesus doesn't look at you and me. He doesn't say, come to me, everyone who's happy, who's positive, who's just certain that things are going to get better. He doesn't say, come to me and keep a positive, keep a stiff upper lip. He doesn't say, come to me if you are certain things are going to get better. He doesn't say, come to me or you're just living in the joy and rejoicing every day. He doesn't say, come to me if everything's rainbow and unicorns. No, he just says, come to me if you're weary and heavy laden. That's me. I believe that's probably you. And so even as we unpack this verse a little bit, I think there's some steps here for all of us who are going at an unsustainable pace. First, he says this. He says, come to me. Fred, I get it. Jesus has done so much for us. The Apostle Paul in Romans 6:23 says it's a gift of God. That's his salvation he's given to us. But there is personal responsibility. As great as the gift of salvation is for all of us, he has presented it to us. But there is an action I need to take. I need to actually open it up. There is something I must do in response. Right? I got to open his gift of salvation. The same thing here. If I want to receive rest for my soul, then there's an action I must take. I need to move in the direction of Jesus. He says, come to me. He doesn't demand it. He asks me to. I ask you, are you going to Jesus? If you're feeling like, man, your pace of life is overwhelming you, you can't sustain it, you're about ready to flame out, pass out, and tap out, then I say, move closer to the direction of Jesus, because that's what he's invited, right? He says, come to me. We need to draw close. And then he says these two things. He says, come to me, what? The weary and those who are heavy laden. The more I thought about this, I believe this is an equation, that this is a process. I think all of us are crying out, God, I need more and more of you. I need more of your rest. I need more soul rest. Jesus, maybe you've not given it those words, but I bet you in some way, shape, or form in the last 3.5 months, you have cried out to be filled up. And you're saying, where is that, God? I want to suggest, and this is what I felt like the Lord put on me the last week, is that maybe I have not made enough room inside of my cup to allow God to pour into it fully, right? We sit there and I go, Jesus, please pour into me. I want more of your rest. And I feel sometimes that Jesus says to me, well, Joel, you've only emptied a quarter of all your worries, fears, anxieties, and all that overwhelm. So I've only got a quarter left of your cup I can pour into. You've got to pour it out to me. Right? He says, come to me, all who are weary. And I believe that specifically and practically. I think that's a step we take. We need to call it out. If you're a leader in whatever industry you're working in, for me as a pastor, I think there's a sense that I've got to keep a stiff upper lip for everyone else. I've got to stay positive when everybody else is maybe worried. If you're leading your home or you got family members or whatever, whether it's a wife or a spouse, it's like, well, I got to be positive for everybody else. You do not have to be positive for Jesus. If not positive for him, you just need to be honest. You need to call it out, admit it, even confess that weariness, that exhaustion, that sense of overwhelm. Man, just pour it out to him. Empty that cup so that now you might be, right, a container that is ready to receive all of his soul rest that he promises. And then he goes on, he's right, heavy laden, which literally in the Greek there, it means those who are crushed in spirit. It means to take that heavy, soul-crushing weight and to bring it to Jesus. To walk up to Christ, literally in your own mind, right? Just envision it there, right? It's the altar of God himself. And he says, here's the deal. Bring me your weary. Bring me that weight that you have been carrying that feels soul-crushing and leave it on his altar. that he might then give us in return his grace and rest for our souls. 1 Peter 5:7 says this. It says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Cast all of it. Right? That ties exactly into Jesus' words there. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. Right? Come to me. Pour out your weary and all the things that you feel make you heavy laden. And in return, he will take all of that. When you wring it out, when you pour it out completely, he will then have the opportunity to pour in fully rest for your souls. Rest for your souls. So here are the two big takeaways for today. Two big takeaways. They're simple but profound, and I am learning. Man, I'm on a journey on this with all of you. I've not figured it all out, but I needed to call us out to this because I think it's a season where we have got to learn better pacing, where we have got to learn some of those disciplines to allow God to pour in us. So here are the two big takeaways today. First one is this: God can only pour in to the extent we have poured out. Think about that. Right, again, as I said, I'm crying out, God, fill me, fill me, fill me. And he says, Joel, I want to fill you, but you've not poured out much room for me to now pour in. That's my responsibility. That's your responsibility. Are you doing it? I was walking around the lake with my wife the other night, and we were talking about this message, and she said, so Joel, what would you say to that person that feels overwhelmed, that feels anxious, that feels just stressed out, that feels like they're going to flame out, pass out, or tap out? And this may sound churchy. I don't mean it to. It's simple yet profound. That means get on your knees. You call out your weariness. You call out your exhaustion. You speak it. There is a freedom found when we speak it out, when we literally bring it to God in those ways, right? Things that are in the dark, things that we keep in our own minds, they have greater power and control over us. There is a power, there's a freedom that is found when we bring it into the light, when we speak it out, even if it's just you in your room, in your car, out on a walk with others, whatever it looks like, but to get it out. Again, God can only pour in to the extent that you have poured out. My encouragement is do it daily. If you're a writer, write it down. If you're a verbal processor like me, cry it out. But pour it out daily, hourly, consistently. Make it your discipline to get rid of that. This is part of achieving a healthy balance. You want more of God's soul rest, then get rid of your soul exhaustion. Pour it out before him as though it is your offering to a God who sees you, knows you, loves you, and is ready and willing to pour into every space that you have poured out. God can only pour in to the extent that we have poured out. Second big idea today is this: rest is a discipline that must be exercised. Rest is a discipline that must be exercised. I'm learning that in this season. As I mentioned, I've been an athlete in the past, not so much today, but certainly was an athlete. And several years ago, I was single. I was living in Southern California. I was a youth pastor out there. I was in the best shape of my life. I was working out 6 hours a day. I was doing triathlons. I'd actually done the Bally's, whatever fitness, Southern California triathlon, and won my age group. I mean, I was crushing it, right? And I was so full of myself and convinced of my physical and endurance ability that there were a handful of friends of ours. We decided we were going to take a friend's trip and we were going to go to Havasu Falls. This is in Arizona. It's part of the Grand Canyon. And you actually drive this long Indian Nation road to get to this parking lot that looks out over the Grand Canyon. And at the bottom of the canyon, 11 miles in, is maybe the prettiest place I've ever been on the planet. It is Havasu Falls, Mooney Falls, Rock Falls. It's this emerald green water, and we've been there multiple times before, but it is a grueling hike to get to the bottom. Again, 11 miles from the parking lot at the top down to Havasu Falls and the campground at the bottom. Along the way, you go through switchbacks, up, down. It's excruciating heat, the whole thing. At about 8 miles in, you get to the village of Supai, which is a super cool little village, and they still stamp their mail. As I understand it, they're still the only village in America that stamps their mail mule train. because that's how the mail gets out. So you pass the village there at 8 miles, and then you got roughly 3 miles to get to the campground. Well, I am, like I said, I'm in the best shape of my life. I'm super fit. I'm endurance. I am so convinced of my ability to push through. And so I got in my backpack. I don't send it down on the mules. No, I'm in good shape. So I get my backpack. It's probably 50 pounds. I got my tent. I got my sleeping bag. I got all my food. I got all my clothes, right? The whole deal. I'm carrying a gallon plus of water. And here's my thing. I've decided, because I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, that I'm going to make it down to the canyon, down to the campground site, and I'm not going to take any breaks. I'm not going to rest. So I passed through the village there at mile 8. And then somewhere between mile 8 and the village and the campground at mile around 11, I come to because I realize I'm laying on my back and there's a couple people off the path that are literally poking me with a stick. And I hear them say, "Is he breathing? Is he alive?" And here's what had happened, right? In my hubris, in my pride, in my determination that I just had to be strong enough, powerful enough, right, enduring enough to do this stupid thing and not take rests, I had flamed out, passed out, and tapped out. And luckily, because I had this 50-pound backpack on, I had fallen over backwards instead of just face planting and possibly doing some damage. But here's this couple poking me with a stick just to make sure I'm okay, because I had not learned the discipline of rest. Man, I think all of us need to learn that. I think we need to check our heart rates. I think we need to check ourselves. I think we need to pour ourselves out so that God can then pour his soul rest in. 2 big takeaways again. God can only pour in to the extent that we have poured out. And rest is a discipline that must be exercised. How are you doing that? Are you taking maybe a little longer walk outside? Set aside the TV, set aside the noise, but really pursue rest and a connection with Jesus. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." I'll wrap us up with this, Hebrews 4:11. Hear this, "Therefore, let us be diligent to enter that rest, so that no one will fall." I pray that that is an encouragement to you today. Jesus wants to offer you his soul rest if we would pour ourselves out and if we would strengthen and discipline ourselves to daily, hourly, by the minute, come near to him. Let me pray. Jesus, thank you so much for today. Thank you that you invite us in. Thank you that you love us. You see us in the midst of our own overwhelming, stressful, anxious circumstances. And that if we would just pour it out, that you are standing by to pour in your soul rest. Would we receive that, and would we discipline ourselves to pursue it? In Jesus' name, amen.